It is 8 minutes past 3 in the afternoon here in London at the moment. Today is Tuesday. We're recording this one day beforehand, as my guest on today's market broadcast is Eoin Treacy, who is based out in LA. And that, of course, messes things around with the time zone a little bit, but we make do, and this should be with you tomorrow on the Wednesday. Anyhow, Eoin, thank you very much for joining me on today's broadcast. How are things in Los Angeles?
Well, it was raining yesterday, so that's a bit of a turn up for the books. But other than that, everything's fine.
Yeah, you before we started recording, you did mention the incredible rate of coronavirus testing that is going on there, and the very large cost of it. Could you share that with our listeners?
Sure. To the best of my knowledge, it's costing the city $112 per test. They're doing about 5,000 tests a day, and that is part of the reason why there's nobody out fixing the potholes. The state of the roads in Los Angeles is frankly atrocious. But and there's always been the excuse, well, I mean, we'd have to shut down traffic to fix them. Well, there's no traffic and there's nobody fixing them because the city is spending every available resource on tackling the coronavirus. I will say, though, that I was really sick about 10 days ago. And I went off. I felt like, okay, if I've got the coronavirus, I had better go and get a test. So I went off and got the test. And, there was a couple of trepidatious days. And then I started feeling better. I was like, well, this couldn't be the coronavirus and get better too fast. But I didn't get my results for 10 days. So that is also something that needs to be wondered about. How much of all of this testing is virtue signaling? If they are not getting the results for nearly 2 weeks, you're going to be in jolly bad shape if you've got the coronavirus and you haven't got your results for 2 weeks and you won't know whether you should have gone to the hospital or not. So there's a lot of machinations going on with regard to the coronavirus, I think.
Quite. This does bring on to sort of a theme I'd like to explore a bit in today's broadcast. So yesterday, this morning, in fact, with the recording, we had Sam Volkering on. We were discussing a bit about the 5G rollout, because 5G, this was a big topic at the, throughout last year. And sort of at the same time, while everybody's inside using their computer all the time, and everyone's using the internet, and internet stocks are doing pretty well out of all of this. It's interesting to find that the 5G internet infrastructure is now, it's unimpeded. As you say, the roads are all shut down. Nobody's there's very few people moving around, so it's quite easy to upgrade internet infrastructure. How does that look actually? Interesting. Let's start with where you are at the moment. I mean, what is there much on 5G rollout at all in LA?
Well, I've had my home router upgraded over the course of the last month by the cable provider to handle 5G in the home. So there's certainly that. Then, of course, there's been a bit of a flurry in terms of getting them the routers up around the local area. So they're definitely building the network. There's no question of that. And I think the main thing that the majority of people are waiting for is not so much any longer about whether there's going to be 5G, because the network is pretty much built. Obviously, they're still doing it, but there's enough of network available in the major cities to get it up and running. What they're really waiting for is for people to get phones in their pockets. And the next round of phones that are due to hit the market are probably being slowed down by the impact on the supply chain from the coronavirus. So I think what we're really seeing is a little bit of a gap occurring between the creation of networks and the availability of handsets, because you are going to need a new phone if you're going to really benefit from everything that 5G provides.
On that, with everything that 5G provides, what do you think is going to be the main, what is going to be one of the main sort of beneficiaries? What's going to be one of the main applications for 5G? Because it's something everybody speaks about so much, and it's hard to imagine what it'll look like. We know it's going to be a very big thing. But what is it that, what do you envision is going to be one of the big applications of 5G? Why is 5G really so important?
I think the way to think about it is that the march of technology is to give everybody on Earth the kind of lifestyle of a Victorian gentleman. So, we've had virtual assistants developing for about 20 years. I think 5G is going to enable the perfection of that kind of service. So, Siri and Alexa and those sorts of voice interactive assistants really aren't very good. Part of the reason for that is because of just the way that the service has been created and because it's still juvenile. But with faster speed and greater access to data, that is going to exponentially improve the ability to enhance those kinds of services. I do think that we're going to get to a point where it will be slightly predictive, so that it will be able to anticipate our needs. It will be able to create a suite of services that are going to allow us to schedule, to get work done, to uh, create more free time so that we can consume the kind of ads they want us to look at. But the reality is that when we think about what's going to be on the phone, it's going to enhance everything that we've already got in terms of apps, but it's going to have an additional layer on top, that services will be provided that we were not previously able to get in terms of virtual assistants. But then on top of that, there's going to be artificial intelligence, deep learning that will become much more commercial when the network can handle the bandwidth.
On the artificial intelligence and deep learning, those labels and sort of buzz phrases, I suppose, get bandied around an awful lot. In terms of how 5G would really, would really allow them to be applied commercially, what kind of applications do you have in mind?
Well, I think the virtual assistant is a virtual done deal. The fact that today one of the big beneficiaries of uh, the lockdowns has been teledoc, where people have been able to get medical attention over the phone. I think that we have already seen the rollout of these kinds of services about 5 years ago, particularly from Alibaba. I think that that is going to get a massive upgrade. We have much more virtual doctor assistants. I think we're going to have a great deal more legal services available online. But then I think we're also going to have the very clear ability to communicate not just with servers, but between phones and between applications. I think that 5G is going to definitely enhance the ability of cars to be more predictive. I think that is something that drivers have and that cars today do not have, and that is probably going to be one of the very big steps towards autonomous driving. We're not there yet, but the ability of cars to not only communicate with the road, communicate and to observe obstacles and hazards, but also to communicate with one another, that I think is going to really be enhanced by 5G. The loss of lag means that uh, we get constant monitoring. Then you're also going to have the Internet of Things become a real phenomenon. It means that there will be real-time updates for sensors in every piece of big equipment, everything from cars to planes. There is definitely then also the potential that drone technology is going to become much more active. When there is no lag, then that is also something that is going to enhance medical attention. In fact, intuitive surgical was one of the original recommendations in Frontier Tech Investor. That company was originally uh, conceived as a remote surgery company.
Right.
They got the robot up and running, but they couldn't get the internet connection stable enough to conduct surgery over long distances. Well, 5G solves for that. And in fact, they've already done a remote uh, surgery in China, and that was perhaps about 5 months ago. So that's also definitely going to come. The big things about 5G are the low latency of the network, and then the massive additional amount of data that can be pushed through, so that much more data-driven applications can front face with consumers. If you think about buzzwords like artificial intelligence and deep learning, they always happen somewhere else. But with 5G, they'll happen natively on your phone. I think that is something that is probably going to be the big selling point of the network.
That's a good way of putting it. I wonder if that patient in China was aware that the surgery was going to be done remotely and using trialing a new technology way away, far away from where the robot was actually operating on him. Seems like quite a brave decision to make.
Well, it would be also very worthwhile if they had interviewed the patient after they interviewed the doctor.
Quite.
We don't know, in fact, if the patient survived the surgery.
Right. I remember a while back using sort of a more safe application for this. One of the trials of 5G, they'd managed, I believe, to somebody in China was able to use operate a robot in a mine in South Africa. With very, very little latency. Again, it was microseconds. You wouldn't be able to even notice the lag between between the person operating the robot and the video feed that they were getting way over in South Africa. It does seem to be the lack of lag seems to be one of those really killer applications for it in general. On the investing side of that, is it the companies that are building the infrastructure you think are going to earn the most from this, going to benefit the most from building out the infrastructure? Or do you think it's going to be from those that are developing the applications, or is it going to be one then the other?
I think it's going to be one then the other. Definitely, it's the ones first that own the networks are going to benefit first. That just makes sense. They have to invest the money. They're going to own the infrastructure. And I think that is pretty much done now. What we're then going to see is the overlay of the applications and the software applications. That is, I think, going to be a very large and lucrative field. And of course, we also know that it's the manufacturers of the phones did fantastically well from 4G, and there's no reason to think that they're not going to do equally well from 5G. In fact, 5G is the really essential for phone manufacturers if they're going to continue to do well. I would say that that's particularly true of Samsung and Apple.
Yeah. Oh, on that note, with the infrastructure builders, there's one thing I heard recently from Jesse Felder, who is a notable investor and writes a lot of market commentary as well, where he mentioned that during the dot-com boom, Cisco, which back then was, it still is now, still that provider of network infrastructure. It was when the dream of the internet was in investors' minds and obviously had not arrived yet. And Cisco, which the narrative about it was correct. I mean, it was going to build the backbone of the internet. However, in dot-com crashed, it didn't prevent it from falling by 90%. On that sort of note, and moving forward to now, where we're all dreaming about what 5G is going to do, and the narratives may be correct with the companies and the businesses that are operating in that space. Do you think there's still that massive risk with the inflated level of the stock market and the great equity boom that we've had and has managed to rebound from March in the US, not so much here in the UK?
Well, I don't think that the biggest companies in the world today are going to fall by 90%. So let's just get that out straight away.
Right.
They're way better capitalized today than they were back then. There's no comparison in terms of the business models that companies are deploying today relative to what they were doing back in the late 1990s. So I think that's that's really one of the most important things for any investor to pay attention to. These the biggest companies in the world today are incredibly cash rich. So they have got a ton of money that they're not at really under any pressure from their valuation in the same way that they would have been back in 1999, where Cisco was trading at an eye-watering valuation. So that is certainly, I think, the big differentiator. But we do have to pay attention to the fact that there are a lot of smaller companies that don't make any money and have got extraordinary valuations. And I think that that is something that is going to eventually end. We certainly know that the Vision Fund, they raised $100 billion and invested it in some of the most overvalued private companies ever. But they lost billions on WeWork, and they've also lost a ton of money on Uber. Now, Uber is trying to buy Grubhub because they want to create a dominant position in food delivery. But Uber doesn't really make any money from food delivery. In fact, Uber doesn't make any money at all. Instacart, which has got shoppers walking around supermarkets and loading supermarket trolleys and delivering it to your home, does not make any money. But they hired 100,000 people in the last 3 or 4 months. So, these types of companies may not survive. Certainly there has been an incredible advance in Shopify, and Shopify's PE ratio has quite recently was nearly 1,000.
Damn.
And that is a valuation that is comparable to 1999. But these are not the biggest companies in the world. I think that is the big differentiator here. These are comparatively minor companies relative to the size of the biggest companies in the world. But as long as there is a wall of liquidity being provided by central banks, well, that is going to ensure that a lot of companies that might not survive otherwise will continue to do well. And that is exactly what we've seen since March.
You mentioned it was a startup that's delivering these the coronavirus testing kits in LA. Do you think that the sort of the rumors that the Silicon Valley has sort of reached the end of its tether and the expansion is no longer going to be the expansion in technology is no longer going to be constrained so much to that one area of California? Do you believe in that narrative, or do you think that LA is still going to be the great incubator for all of these tech companies?
Well, I guess it's San Francisco is where, or close to San Francisco is where Silicon Valley is. But I would say that one of the two things that you need for a startup, you need money and you need engineers. And in order to really get a startup up and running, you need to have those people close together. That's what you have in Silicon Valley. You have a massive concentration of private wealth, and you have engineering universities pumping out new graduates every year. And they have been able to engineer that so that new ideas tend to flow into the area because you have the potential to get the funding very quickly to start up a new business. I think that as we go forward, once companies have established themselves and they are looking at trying to build and to expand, then they don't necessarily need to stay in the Silicon Valley area. But I just don't think that you're going to be able to recreate that ecosystem, that excitement factor online and remotely that you can today in the very local concentrated area of the valley.
With of course, China has made part of its big global proposition the rollout of 5G. They've invested a lot in trying to get a head start on 5G, as it's this sort of this killer technology that if you can get ahead of it, well, you can get ahead of a lot of the world and give yourself a great advantage if you have it. In that sort of sense, where you have much of the Western developed world yet to have such a broad 5G rollout and 5G adoption. Do you think is there anything in particular you think China specifically has an edge in when it comes to 5G, as they've been trying so hard to get ahead at it?
Well, they're on the cusp of getting Huawei to more than 50% of all 5G routers. And once they achieve that, then they'll be able to dictate terms in relation to how the technology develops forever. So yes, they have done a wonderful job in ensuring that they have a dominant position in 5G. I think that is why it is being resisted so heavily by anyone who's got any kind of sense at all, because there is the clear potential that the reason China has spent so much money trying to develop 5G is because they are turning it into a massive spy network. And that is not a trivial consideration. It's certainly not something that can be considered as a conspiracy theory either. They are definitely looking towards global domination, and they definitely see 5G as a major tool in achieving that.
On the topic of sort of Huawei's competitors, then, and the companies that are Western companies which are developing 5G applications. I've looked to Nokia as one of the interesting companies, because we've spoken a lot about the late 1990s, and of course Nokia was one of these companies which did the pride and joy of Finland, as it were, and had this gigantic valuation before its work in telecoms, and since then it crashed, and it's crashed incredibly hard following that period. In terms of, do you think Nokia might have a chance to regain some of its lost glory now?
I think if they were going to, they would have done it already. And we just talked about the building of the infrastructure is almost done. So it is now time to start thinking about where the next iteration is going to be. I don't think anyone thinks that Nokia is going to be the leader in developing 5G handsets. So that kind of excises them from that part of the market. Once the network is built, then the clear rationale for looking at the infrastructure companies is going to be less compelling. Then it's going to be the software overlays are going to be where the real value is created.
Can you expand on that a little more for our listeners before we head off for today?
Well, I think that Nokia is a company that has been building infrastructure now for more than 20 years, and it's a low margin business. The kinds of businesses that do well in a bull market are those that can leverage scale and increase their margins. And software is where the easiest route to do that. That's why the app economy generally has done better, and we are definitely moving increasingly down towards that, where software as a service becomes the primary business model of the service economy. Just reminding ourselves that the service economy is by far the most important today. We no longer have a huge dependence on employment from agriculture or employment from industry. The vast majority of employment is in the service sector, but the part of the service sector that's making money is software as a service. Within these software companies, where they immediately gain scale by having the whole world at their disposal, and then provide services that they can charge for on a monthly basis, so that they immediately insert a subscription business model. Those are the kinds of companies that are going to continue to represent outperformance for the foreseeable future.
But with 5G, there'll be, this will come in new iterations, right? Ones that we've not, we've not seen before, maybe not even imagined before, right?
I think that's absolutely inevitable. So we're going to have more medical, we're going to have more legal, we're going to have more entertainment, and we're going to have more, I think, remote control. We're going to have a lot more interconnectivity, and all of those are going to require a different app that is going to represent a cash flow that can be monetized for a company.
I think that's a great way of summing it up. Eoin, thank you very much for joining me.
Always a pleasure.
That was Eoin Treacy over at Frontier Tech Investor. So if you wonder about all of the 5G infrastructure that's being built while we're all cooped up inside, have a think on some of the commercial applications and some of the investment opportunities that we may be getting out of it. That sums up today's market broadcast. Hope you enjoyed it. We shall be back again tomorrow. Do give me a follow on Twitter. If you do use Twitter, it's at FederalXS, or just search for Boaz Shoshan and you should be able to find me. But we will be back tomorrow. I don't have a guest just yet, but you'll find out then. See you later.